Okay, good evening, everybody. Happy New Year to you all. As Chair of the Southeast Region, I am delighted to welcome you to this evening's webinar, which is Unlocking ESG and the Circular Economy, which will be delivered by Mary Cronin. And I suppose I'll just go through the format first this evening of how it will be delivered. My committee member, Dr. Mary Doyle-Kent, will provide an extended introduction first from Mary Cronin, and then we'll go into the webinar itself. And then at the end of the webinar, we will take Q&A. So please do use the Q&A facility, which is based at the bottom of your screen. Thereafter, then we'll have a closeout, and I'll remind you of some of the events that are up and coming. So without further ado, I'll pass you across to committee member Dr. Mary Doyle-Kent. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lawrence. So I'm absolutely delighted to be here with everybody and bringing along a friend and a colleague, Mary Cronin, to the Southeast region and really to all of Ireland. We've had, I believe, a very good uptake in this webinar because it's a very, very interesting subject. And Mary is an expert, a renowned expert in this field. I got to know Mary recently in the last year or so, where we co-authored and presented a paper in a recent a conference in Kosovo, and the name of the paper was Creating Value with Environmental Social Governance in Irish Manufacturing SMEs, a focus on disclosure of climate change risks and opportunities. And that paper is actually available now. It's available on Google Scholar and it's free. So if you want to find a little bit more about that, please have a look at Google Scholar. So this evening, Mary is going to give us a very interesting, I have no doubt whatsoever, a very, very interesting presentation. And I suppose it's a very topical, subject. And it's really about climate change and how it's going to affect all of our industries going forward. In 2022, the IPCC report stated that without rapid action, the world's 1.5% global goal will slide beyond our reach. And this, is something that is being monitored, I suppose, and all of us as engineers, it's really important that we're aware of what we can do, I suppose, as individuals. And I come from, you can see I'm a lecturer in SETU, and for me, this is a subject that I actually spend a lot of time, I suppose, educating, the next generation on. So the other thing, from an industrial point of view, with evolving regulations and growing pressure from our government and the European Union, from consumers and from investors, organizations, industrialists are being assessed through the environmental, social and governance lens. And consequently, Irish organizations, we need to identify climate change risks. We need to identify opportunities, and we need to identify consequences. And Mary will give us a lot of information about these different areas. So given that climate change reporting is here to stay, we need to consider, what this means for our organizations nationally and locally. And ESG reporting will transition from non-mandatory to mainstream. In this evolving landscape, then the circular economy is an essential part of this solution, growing rapidly to create the balance, new economic growth with climate challenges and advancing the tradition to a low carbon future. So let's hand it over now to the expert, Mary. Thank you. And we're really looking forward to it.
Thank you, Mary, and thank you, Lawrence, for that great introduction. So I'm going to talk about, and I'm delighted to be here, thank you for the invite. I'm going to talk about the circular economy, what it is, pathways to the circular economy, and I've included a little bit on the circular economy EU package and regulation because I think it's relevant to all of us as engineers and in how we navigate this new environment. With that, I've linked in, as Mary has said, ESG, and we'll talk about that. What will that mean for you as engineers? The global risks, drivers, risks, trends, and opportunities, and there are a lot of opportunities. Also just put in a slide on green funding opportunities, because I know we've county councils, but we also have smaller organisations in the audience as well. So to start with with what's the circular economy, is waste a challenge or an opportunity? I think it's an opportunity, and I work a lot with waste as a resource. There's 2 billion metric tons of municipal solid waste produced annually. A third of that is not managed in an environmentally safe manner. And global waste production is set to double over the next 10 years. I want to show you a short video.
We live in a world with finite materials.
We are throwing an awful lot of electronics,
plastic, food,
Carpets, clothing.
away. It's a waste of precious materials.
If we could build an economy that would use things rather than use them up, we could build a future that really could work in the long term.
You design the product in a way that
Can be taken apart. Once the consumer has finished using them,
you remanufacture it and give it out again. You can reduce your production cost hugely if applied correctly.
Instead of garments ending up in landfill,
companies can repurpose it, reuse it, making profit out of their waste.
We take some resources from nature and bring it back in the form of nutrients.
It's very much a natural cycle.
We use 70% less water than conventional agricultural methods.
Our packaging is not a waste, it's something that you can consume and eat.
We redesign everyday products to make them fully recyclable.
We farm as close to nature as is possible.
the H&M Group has set ambitious targets to use 100% sustainably sourced materials.
There is a lot of conversation about not buying clothes, but different models where you can rent clothing.
We developed fully modular headphones that we offer on a subscription basis.
The circular economy itself is inevitable in my view.
It's not one fix, it's about the entire system being redesigned.
This is, to me, the only way to fight climate change, to fight pollution, to fight waste.
This is a business model that stacks up.
Global companies cannot survive in the future without transitioning towards a circular economy. That is a really exciting future.
So some really interesting stuff there in around precious metals, reusing, recycling, remanufacturing. That's what we're going to talk about over the next 10 minutes. But before we go there, just what is the linear economy? And unfortunately, 92% of our business models are linear. But there's also an opportunity, as in, to turn those into circular models. So the linear economy is where we have infinite resources, where they've been extracted for years. We have produced goods and services. We've distributed those, consumed those, and are consuming huge amounts of these products, and then we're disposing them. But unfortunately, our landfills are full. So this is, as you know, called take, make, and waste. And the key elements of a circular economy are, a circular economy is one that's restorative by design. And I'll repeat this a few times over the webinar, but when we look at the principles of the circular economy, we look to design out waste and pollution, which some of you engineers will be doing already. We want to keep the products in use, materials in use for as long as possible, and we want to regenerate our natural systems to bio-based. So circular economy and circular bioeconomy, I work a lot in bioeconomy, which is the bio-based industries. So the bioeconomy here, our green cycle on the left, is the renewable biological resources from what we call the land, sea, crops. And in that circle, we take those bio-based and we put them through anaerobic digestion. We create biogas, and a lot of new industries are starting from that whole bio-based. On the what we call the technical cycle, there's a lot of opportunities here on both sides. There's opportunities, but also there's challenges and risks relating to the recovery and material choices. So in this blue line, here in the middle, we have the linear process, as I've explained what that is. But in the blue technical cycle, we have 5 circles, but at the very outside of the circle is recycle. We want to stay as close to the center as possible. So when we're designing for circularity, we're always thinking we want to keep our product in use for as long as possible. So here we're thinking about, how do we maintain this? How do we disassemble this? How do we reuse this? What kind of materials are we using? What's our end of life? We look at how do we refurbish and how do we remanufacture. The last thing we want to do is ever to recycle, because recycling costs more currently than virgin materials. So if we look at why are we doing this in the first place, we look at the drivers and the benefits and the opportunities, and there are a lot of opportunities. First of all, and it's now becoming a key driver, is we're going to be mandated. Regulations are coming down from Europe around waste and around circularity. So that will drive us in that direction. From an environmental, societal, and government aspect, as we know as well, from 2023, new regulations are coming in around how companies are responsible for the products and services and their end of life. But also, not just that, our consumer patterns are changing. So consumers want to know, where are products coming from? What's happening to those products? What are you, as a manufacturer, doing with those products, and how are we designing as engineers those products and keeping those products in use for as long as possible from a durability aspect. Economic opportunities. So this consumer pattern links into this. There are a lot of opportunities in waste, and I call it a resource. And I work with companies in looking at the opportunities in around those resources and how we can create revenue models for those. I know, for example, for myself, I don't want to own my washing machine. I don't want to own my Apple Mac. I want the manufacturer to own that washing machine. I'd like a lease on my washing machine. I want to know that Siemens would take that washing machine back, and I want to know there are parts available for that washing machine. And more people are becoming like that as consumers. From an environmental aspect, we want to know, in the products and services that we're creating and we're designing, what's the CO2 impact and GHG impact as well, because there's the whole ecosystem and there's the whole biodiversity piece. So that means, as engineers, we need to think about the systems thinking, the bigger piece around that, what we're designing into, and thinking about that end of life. Likewise as well, we talk about the just transition. So it's no longer just about economic growth, and I hate to use the word degrowth, but how we create our companies to thrive, as opposed to, it's not just all about the economic growth. It is, and we want companies to grow, but also we want to understand the environmental and the societal impact, and that's what the just transition is about. And there's a huge number of new markets emerging. It's a really exciting time and great for companies who are in this space. It's only 9% of global and business models that are circular. And, the opportunity is there to convert those 92% of linear companies. Supply chain collaboration. I noticed on some of your companies, when you're doing RFPs or tenders, you will be asking now around your suppliers, what's their, environmental impact, what's their value chain, what's their supplier chain. And, there is a cost to this, but that is the way it's going from a supplier aspect. And then a lot of innovation and technology driving all of this, data, passports, technology, AI. So here, just at a very high level, when I'm looking at the benefits, I'm looking at, for example, the raw material conservation. So I look at water, energy, and waste, and how we can measure that, and then report on that. And then I look at the whole innovation side in around remanufacturing, whether that's EVs or that's energy, or whether that's, parts or products. And a whole part of this is about ownership, and we don't need to own products. And you as engineers, when you're designing, we need to think about, can this product be, does the user just need access to the product as opposed to the product itself? So as an engineer, these are the questions I would ask companies I work with. Even if it's not your business, it's your customer business. So you need to think about this. How are you engaging and assessing the needs of your customers from a circularity aspect? And what are their needs and their future needs? How are you assessing linear versus circular and the impact on your waste, and how are you measuring that? And what impact is it going to have in 5 years' time on your reporting of these? And what are your internal initiatives to adapt products, services, investments, and operating models? And by that, I mean looking at your business model and saying, are there parts we could start now as regards looking at our waste and the circularity of our business model? And what are your external initiatives to influence stakeholders, policyholders, and policymakers? And this is really key for us as engineers, because it's no longer good enough for us to say, well, that's somebody else's problem because they've written the policy. We need to help people in the ecosystem and systems makers to understand what are the implications of the current policies there and make that change happen. And in the external piece, in the larger ecosystem with our stakeholders, we need to understand, who are we having an impact on from a broader aspect, and policymakers. So when I look at risks and opportunities, I look at, well, look, we're addressing risks here, higher commodity prices, the environmental systems, when we're looking at these circular business models, ecosystem biodiversity impacts that you as engineers will know about, and then the resource scarcity and the supply chain challenges, local versus global. We've all seen post-COVID that we can't be bringing our tomatoes or our apples from, we don't need to be bringing them from Africa and New Zealand. So through our circular economy principles, then we're creating durability, renewability, we're keeping our products and service in use for as long as possible, but that can only happen if we design that in very early in the design stage, and 80% of that is locked in at the beginning of our design. We're building in reuse materials, understanding our end of life, our remanufacture, how we can upgrade or refurbish that product. And there's a lot of opportunities, as I said, cost reductions, when we're measuring our energy or we're measuring our water or our waste, at least we have a metric, and then we have a metric to go by, and then we're looking at new opportunities for that. Lots of new markets, new competitive advantage, and building brands. So when I'm working with companies, it's about, when we're looking at circularity, how do we build in that competitive advantage? And it is a competitive advantage, and from an investment aspect as well, and how we leverage technology driven by data and AI. So when I look at circular business model innovation, I'm looking at the business models of clients and how we adapt the business model to meet those needs of our customers and our future customers. So whether you're in County Council or you're in ESB or you are in the likes of Carberry, we're thinking all the time about those inputs that we have at design stage. We're thinking about, and the materials we're using, the supplies and the suppliers, who's on our supply chain and our value supply chain. We're thinking about resource recovery and also new revenue opportunities we have there. We're also thinking about, for example, how we're going to repair, reuse. So some examples I've just given there: Modubuild, a fantastic Irish company, and Modular Built Houses. If any of you don't know Farrell Furniture, they're doing great stuff on taking old government furniture, and they've remanufactured it. Really, really great stuff. And the Rediscovery Centre is doing a lot of great in paint and recycling, and they have a circular economy academy there as well. But the key thing is that when we're designing and we're building, we are really building our products for durability and product life extension. Sharing platforms, I don't necessarily want to own my car. I'd like to lease it. I don't want to own my Apple Mac. I want to know that Apple's taking back all my parts. So then we're creating products as a service. It's a great Irish company called Urban Volt. I have them as a case study. So they're providing lighting as a service to larger organizations. We don't need to own those physical lights. And Philips have been doing the same for years. Philips now actually have got into to the health service as well, and Logitech from a manufacturing aspect. So I use the Ellen MacArthur Foundation quite a bit, a UK circular economy. It's a great resource. So if you don't know it, you should certainly look at the resources there. So the question as engineers we need to think about is, how do we create new activities, revenue streams? How are we designing for disassembly, remanufacture? This is called the Resolve framework from Ellen MacArthur, and we're looking at regenerate, share, optimize, loop. So when I have a business model, I'm looking to say, where are opportunities here? And even if you're a very linear company, you can start to think with one product, how can we make this? How can we think about this as what's happening with the end of life? I work a lot in the bioeconomy. I've given some good examples here for great Irish companies who are fully circular, like Hexafly, a fantastic company, creating farm feed fertilizers from black soldier fly, 100% circular biorefinery, Carberry, another biorefinery, farm to zero, and some great work. They're aligned with the SFI BioOrbit Centre, a super centre if any of you are doing research. And from a sharing aspect, I have module builds there, Food Cloud, Green Generation, who are bought by Clon Bio recently. And there's a number of other biorefineries there. Dawn Farms doing great work for circularity, and Urban Vote that I've mentioned. That's one of the frameworks I've used, but I use a number of them. So the ecosystem and systems thinkings and drivers. So as engineers, we need to think about, okay, what's our business model? Now, this is a bit of a, there's a lot in this diagram, but really it's just to give you a sense of the systems part that we need to think about. So we have our business model here in the middle, and you have you're thinking from a circularity aspect. And when I'm working with a company, I'm always thinking about what are the environmental trends, what's happening from is it plastics we're talking about, what are the waste opportunities here? And we're looking at changing, what's driving this is changing consumer behaviors and environmental and societal drivers. From a market aspect, we're looking at new markets, new types of investors. So I work in the investor space and around sustainable finance in this area, regional clusters. I love the idea, and I think we have great opportunity to build communities, build regions like they've done in Denmark and in Germany, and within those regions and farming regions, have small anaerobic digesters that are driving this. We really need to have more anaerobic digesters and small biorefineries to take in that waste and to reuse that biomass. Industrial forces, we've primary producers, entrepreneurs, but they're all data-driven, like agri and food. It's data-driven platforms where we look at these and how we can make really good traction on that. From a political aspect, there's, the government's being heavily penalized because we're not meeting our targets, COVID, Brexit, Ukraine, wars. So we need to think about when we have that business model, what's the political impact here? And then, there's key trends and new legislation and regulations and policies. It's quite a complex ecosystem that we're now working in. However, though, I would say as engineers that it's changed really dramatically, maybe over the last even 10 years, because we're no longer just working in silos. I work with DAFM and I work with DEC, in around the policies. And we also need to think of, those silos maybe we were in and saying who actually are our stakeholders, who are our suppliers, who are the market forces here. So it's from a systems aspect. Just one or two case studies very quick. I referred to Urban Vote, a fantastic company. They provide light as a service. The company that they provides now is larger companies, zero capital investment. This is their USP, cost reduction. The provider carries the data analysis. So it's all driven by data and installation, hence no time investment, no maintenance for the company, and they're guaranteeing performance, and that's all driven by metrics. And then if we look at Google, and I know Google is a bigger one to quote here, but they have a zero waste data centers since 2019. Now they're partnered with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. Now you need to think about, what are you sending to landfill? How much are you sending to landfill? A lot of penalties coming down the road on that, as you know. So in 2019, 90% of waste was diverted from landfill from Google, and this is what they're measuring. So they diverted 91% of waste from landfill at their offices globally. It was 2019, preventing 6 million pounds of food from going to landfill. So the larger organizations, when you look at their ESG reports, this is what they're reporting on. Consumer electronics, they're saying by 2025, 50% of all plastics will use recycled materials now. I looked for earlier just for the updated, and I couldn't easily find it on that. But that's what they're measuring if you look at their ESG reports. I just want to show you this on DaisyD. So the reason I've showed you that is because, you know, they are running the process around taking the materials back. And, you know, this is the materials part. For every 100,000 iPhones taken back, Daisy can potentially recover, you know, aluminium, copper, cobalt, steel. These are really valuable materials, and they're sitting in our drawers. I mean, how many of us have old laptops and phones? So in 2018, 74,000 metric tons of waste generated from Apple. In 2018, that's 24% was diverted from landfill. And they're the kind of figures that we need and that our service providers need as well. So there was just some case studies. I just want to very briefly tell you about the circular economy EU packages, regulations and policies that impact you. So I'm not going to go into the Green Deal and just transition, but they are there, you know, and the Green Deal is policy set by the EU and the EC with the aim of making Europe the first climate neutral continent by 2050. So within that Green Deal is they're transforming EU's economy for what we call the sustainable future, but all of that includes mobilizing industry, clean and circular economy that applies to you, building and renovating in an energy and a resource efficient way. And we got to measure it, we got to find when we're looking at our design, where is our data coming from? So we've got output from an ESG aspect. We're looking at preserving and restoring the ecosystems of biodiversity. We need to measure that. And then things like our just transition, our societal, what does that mean for the communities we're living in? So again, we're looking at both the economic growth, we're looking at the environmental impact, and we're looking at the societal impact, and that all leads into our farm to fork. And there's a whole within the EU Green Deal accelerating the shift from sustainable to smart mobility, for example. I've just highlighted financing the transition there as well. A lot of you know, green funds there for you if you're looking to move from linear to circular. And this is just the action plan. You'll see this on the government's website. But at a very high level, consumption of biomass, fossil fuels and metals and materials are expected to double over the next 40 years. So we won't be out of a job anytime soon. And while annual waste generation is projected to increase by 70% by 2050, now there's a great opportunity of what we can do, how we manage that waste, how we manage the biomass that's currently going to even our food and our grass from a county council aspect. So 50% of total GHG emissions and more than 90% of biodiversity loss and water stress comes from resource extraction. I mean, that's just incredible. And that's up to all of us to look at how we're designing. So as you know, the National Circular Economy Bill was signed into law in 2022, so that's placing the circular economy strategy onto a statutory footing and the commitment to the circular economy. So it's no longer, it is statutory now. So what does that really mean for you? So the action plan objectives are, and you'll know this, it's make sustainable products the norm, empower consumers and public buyers. So that's when you're doing your tenders. You're looking at who are your suppliers, where are they buying from, local versus global. The focus on sector using the most resources where circularity potential is high, like say, for example, electronics, ICT, batteries, the toxicity within that. And I even look at, for example, I work with the likes of tarmac for a backfill aspect. Tarmac is toxic. So you're looking at, I won't call out any suppliers now, but you know, there's a durability part there with tarmac. Packaging, plastics, textiles, right across all sectors, food, water, nutrients. So we want to make sure, I want to measure this, you use less water, less waste, make circularity work for people, regions and cities, and lead global efforts, all of us in the companies we're in. So this is just, I'm not going to go into this now because of time, but when I'm working with a company and I'm creating their sustainability strategy, then whether it's ESG I want to include or sustainability, a scope and plan, we start that, see where they're at, then we look at what's the company's vision, purpose, why circularity, what are the benefits. We scope and evaluate, the circular growth opportunities, risks, barriers, and then we do a gap analysis and a materiality assessment around who are these stakeholders, what's the real impact. And then we might analyze the supply chains, if that's relevant to a particular company, identify and prioritize opportunities, we evaluate and advise, and then we define the circular strategy. But that's nothing new to you guys if you're doing sustainability strategies anyway. But I make sure more so that circularity and circular design is in that at a very early stage, and that leaders and board members are bought into this. If your board and your CEO isn't bought into this, then I would be very reluctant to work with a company that doesn't, that the buy-in isn't at that level. It's too much work. I thought I put this in earlier, and it's just a few slides on circular design. So I do a lot of work from a design aspect and the role of design. So as I've said, you know, there's huge opportunities to design circular business models. So we need to redesign our products, our cities, and all of those linear systems. So when we consider design, the shift really is to circular, and we want to design out that waste and pollution. And even if there are new projects, thinking about that. And so a lot of people and companies are still unfortunately designing for the linear economy. So we have a lot of redesigning to do. So when I'm looking at a design process, I divide it into 4 steps, and this is just another framework. So we understand what the user needs, then we define what is it within the company you want to do, whether that's waste or water, that challenge as a designer, and then we might, you know, prototype as many iterations as possible, and then we release and build that. And so there are ways of doing circular design within your products, and as you know, designing is an iterative process. Those of you who've done design thinking, and we're constantly zooming in and zooming out, zooming in to see what's the narrower focus and zooming out to see how does this impact the system. So I have a poll here. I think, Sinead, you're just going to put up that poll for me. So the question is, because I know I've been doing quite a bit of talking, so which of the following is not one of the 3 principles of the circular economy? Do we want to keep our products and materials in use for as long as possible? Do we want to really design for endless recycling, regenerate natural systems? So very quickly pop that up. I think you can see the response. You can see. Have you run that there, Sinead?
Yeah, it's running there now. Do you want me to end it? We've about 35% have voted now.
Okay, that's fine. That's perfect. Yep, you can end that. Perfect, that's great. Okay, so correct here, the 60% is correct. No, we do not want to design for endless recycling. We want to keep our products and materials in use. We want to regenerate those bio-based systems, and we want to design out waste. But recycling is really the last thing we want to do because it's too expensive. Okay, so strategies for circular design then. I won't go over this again, but it's really for you to think about incorporating principles of circularity into your designs. And that's thinking about the waste at the early stage and pollution and what's going to happen at my end of life. Keep my products and materials in use. So you're really thinking about durability, disassembly, and regeneration of natural systems. So from a county council aspect, I know there's a few county council people online, thinking about, well, what are we doing with our waste? Where's our backfill waste going to? What are we doing with our biomass, our grass, our, you know, all of that types of waste, and to think about that. Can we biorefine it? Can we look for alternative uses for that? Is ownership really necessary? I ask this question all the time. So central to all of this is a shift from ownership to access. You know, I don't need to own my washing machine or my car or my Apple. So I'd like access to those products, and we are moving in that direction. So not terribly fast currently. So I gave an example here of GoCar, but when you're thinking about your business models, offering products on a short-term basis through rental, subscription, or sharing. Product life extension, I should have put in maybe different examples for this one. So just thinking about when you're designing your product, extending out that life, you know, designing the products that last and its durability, but they need to be both physically and emotionally durable. So that's that whole appeal, or allow the product to adapt with the user change. That might be kids' clothing, that might, if it breaks, it can be fixed. You know, examples like that's durability. So just another poll there, Sinead, you might just put that up. Which of the following approaches creates the highest value for you when you're designing? Is it reuse? Is it remanufacturing? Or is it recycling? I know it's late in the evening for these polls, but I thought we'd engage. That's fine there, Sinead. If you have, if we got, great, yeah, for sure. That's great, you can close that. For sure, it's reuse. So both recycling when you're designing and remanufacturing are important to recover and retain material in a circular economy, but really we need to design products that are reused and remain in use for as long as possible. And that's, we really want to gain the maximum value for customers and businesses. CEOs or CFOs ask me, well, how are we supposed to make money? You make money on renting and other new business models opportunities. Modular design, this is about designing products that are used to repair, remanufacture. I've given some examples here. Fairphone is one, it's a modular phone, but also with some really, really good, you might know Vision Built. They're doing great work. They were bought by Cisco, I think about 2 years ago, 18 months ago, fantastic company. So it's offsite building, modular building, and they're measuring everything that goes in. It's all data tracked, so it's really all tech driven from a data aspect. So if I put a 2-bedroom house onto my 2 bedrooms on the back of my house, if I want to take it down in 10 years time, we have all the data and steel, cement tracked. So I'll show you just very quickly on circular design.
Explaining the circular economy at some level is very simple. Circle. Easy idea, right? We can all picture a circle. And we can also picture a line, right? So the idea that our modern industrial economy was designed around a line that starts by digging stuff out of the ground and ends by throwing stuff away. And somewhere in the middle, there's a point in which you produce something valuable and we, as consumers, buy that thing and use that thing, but then we throw it away. And it makes perfect sense, right? It's a way of going from nothing to something. The trouble is you end up with a something at the end that's of no value but to anybody, and it's filling up the planet, and you've used up those materials. But this idea of like taking that line and kind of bending it around into a circle and saying the stuff that we use to create value for us as consumers, there's no reason why it can't continue to be used. Either that thing gets continued to be used, that product or whatever it is stays valuable, or we take the materials from it and reuse them in some way. I feel better as a designer, I feel better as a member of society if I'm creating things and I'm using things that I can do as much of that as I like, and it's not going to be bad for the planet. In fact, it's going to be good for the planet. It's going to maybe help restore things, not just not damage things. And so that sense of meaning that comes from designing and using and experiencing things that we could do for a long, long time, that everybody on the planet could do instead of just a privileged few, that's a pretty special feeling, and that's the feeling I want to have about everything that we design. I hope the guide is it's a moment when many, many more designers can kind of embark on that journey of learning and embark on that journey of change and just get started and begin to design just a little bit differently.
So that's from IDEO. They're just on design. So our last poll here, and you know, Tim Brown is just talking about that, you know, the user, the experience, everything we design, and you know, we're designing for both economically, environmentally, and societally, and for our communities. So last question. So what percentage of a product environmental impact is locked in, do you think, at design stage? Okay, I think you can end it there. Sinead, thank you. We have some results. 80%. Yes, so you've some varying results there. So it's actually 80%. So 80% at the design stage, at the very early design stage, you're thinking about your end of life. You're thinking about, you know, what am I going to do? Reuse, disassemble. So it's really important, that piece. Okay, so I'm just going to finally just talk about ESG briefly for 5 minutes, and then we'll finish up for any questions. So environmental, societal, and governance, and how it's related to your sustainability strategy and how it's related to circularity. So it's really the environmental, societal, and governance factors are a set of standards and frameworks to measure how companies operate in respect to the planet, economically, sustainability, people, and equitable societies and governance. And so when I'm working with companies in around their sustainability strategy and ESG, from an environmental aspect, I asked the question, how does the company interact with the environment? So from a climate, how do we measure it? Are they measuring it? What's the data you have on it? Carbon emissions, water, pollution and waste. From a societal aspect, we asked the question, how does the company engage with society? So from a labor aspect, social inclusion, you know, where are you getting your products from, health and safety, women, ethnic groups, labor rights, and that's really the societal piece, but as well as that community piece as well is in there, that it's equitable. And finally, that governance piece around how does the company manage itself? That's around corporate governance, board structure, risk management, policy and lobbying, independence, diversity. And what's driving this change? So there's a number of drivers, government regulation, and we know 2023, a lot of regulations coming down the line on this. There's a whole increased political market and uncertainty on Ukraine, COVID, Brexit, that's driving this as well, and targets in around our GHGs. Some of our production systems just are not sustainable and changes are required. And also the way we're operating as systems, like regionality, clusters, how we cluster even here from an Irish and a European aspect, global warming, and even fossil versus bio-based. You know, there's a lot of tax incentives for fossil. They're not there yet for bio-based, but we're getting there in how we move from fossil to bio-based. And even from a, you know, a county council aspect and from an engineering aspect, how do we build those green biorefineries and how do we get those anaerobic digesters up? That really will divert some of this waste from landfill. Lower investment risks. I work with companies around raising finance for bio-based systems, helping mitigate non-financial risks, proving longer-term risks, adjusted returns. And then there's a whole piece around building your brand and a perception, you know, ESG, advantage. The consumers are saying, well, at least you start measuring you can, there's consumer, as the consumer behaviors are changing, then it's correlated. And the demographics are also changing more. If you need investment, more female investors and more impact investors, and millennials are now thinking about where it's coming from, and they're driving all of these. And just very briefly, from a climate change aspect, it's a systemic risk. So back up to that systems thinking piece that I was talking about in circular design, this physical and transaction risk. So these will materialize in the future. So these risks affect, for example, our households, businesses, governments right across the system. So the magnitude and nature of these risks will be determined by the action. Now, Mary referred that to the IPCC report in the beginning. So I don't know if you've seen this by the World Economic Forum. So if we're at 2%, then the frequency of extreme rain, for example, in 1.5 is plus 17%. And if we're at 2%, it's plus 36%. So what does that actually mean? I think my slide's slightly out there. I'll come back to that one. No, actually it isn't. Okay, I've missed the slide. So what does that actually mean from a World Economic Forum aspect? It means that, sorry, I'll just move back there one. It means that high on our risks are, you know, extreme weather, biodiversity challenges, and the risks that we've associated from a climate change aspect. So just at a very high level, ESG frameworks and agencies. So when we're looking at the regulations, so a lot of regulations in around EU taxonomy, what we call the Sustainability Board, the IFRS, and then there's the reporting framework. Some of you will already be using them. They're GRI and how you're going to report that energy, water, waste, societal governance, TCFD and SASB. So some of you may already be reporting on these, some of you may not be. But these are driven by global goals like the Sustainable Development Goals, or the PRI, which is Responsible Development Investment, and as you know, Paris Agreement. But also what this means is that they're rated from there's rating agencies like MSCI and Bloomberg, for example, are rating companies that are sending back their ESG reporting. So to put those two together, the circular economy is an essential part of the transition to deliver ESG. So in the evolving landscape, the circular economy or circularity is an essential part of that solution. And we've talked about how we can deliver that on climate change and ESG issues. So risks, trends, and opportunities. This was the slide I was referring to earlier. So the global risks in 2020, this is an interesting slide actually, because when we look at the bottom left here, The global risks in 2020 were here a low impact, were low inflation, war, a failure for urban planning, energy price shocks. Whereas when we look at the 2021-22, within 18 months, they changed dramatically post-COVID, post-Ukraine, and the high risks are climate action failure, extreme weather, biodiversity loss, and that's all well documented in the IPCC report. Interestingly, Mark Carney, the ex-governor of the Bank of England, has said, unless firms ignoring climate crisis will go bankrupt. And, there's a lot of, we see a lot of articles on that. So it's just from the global risks aspect. I'm not going to go into these trends and opportunities because I want to finish up in a few minutes, but there are a lot of opportunities and the emerging trends are moving that way around acceleration of extreme cat events. There's policies and programs, insurance products that can be created. There's a lot of circular economy, remanufacturing, disassembly, and I have there for anyone in finance or in insurance underwriting longer term sustainable business, because the climate has a big impact in insurance and from a finance aspect, creating products as a service, developing modular products, dematerialization, looking at solutions using minimal materials, safe alternative materials, renewable energy, preferred solutions, fossil versus bio-based, and that whole social conscience and impact investing, sustainable consumption and population shifts. We're looking at, what's happening in the Ukraine, for example, but also increased elderly care and forced migration, and ESG tax policies are changing. So disclosure. So why do SMEs and companies need to disclose, comply with regulations? I kind of said this under drivers: attract and retain investors, cost reductions, productivity uplift, boost employee motivation, unlock opportunities, and building brands. I'm going to finish up now. This is just one slide I've just put in here. And for any of you looking for maybe to migrate, Enterprise Ireland have some really good, if you look at their green services, climate action vouchers if you're a smaller company, but Green Start and Green Plus helping you to transform from linear to circular. You can, depending on where you're at, it could be 2 day, 7 day, it could be strategic consultant piece. I'm also part of HPAN group, but there's a lot of, green, there's disruptive technology, so there's funding available. Okay, and that's it for me. I'm